very good evening all. I am Aditi Lama with the Thursday night edition of South Asian News, Vision of Asia. We are coming to you from a studio in New York City. Welcome to the show. Let's begin the episode taking a look at the coronavirus pandemic and its impact. The world has surpassed 115 million cases of COVID-19 with more than 2.5 million deaths. Here in the United States, we're at more than 518,000 COVID-19 deaths with nearly 29 million cases. Even as the trajectory of cases decline, we're still losing close to 2,000 people each day to the coronavirus. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky has warned about the ongoing trajectory of cases nationwide and the detection of more cases of virus variants across the country. Meanwhile, COVID-19 vaccinations are ramping up to speed up the process of getting all Americans inoculated. Johnson & Johnson, along with Pfizer and Moderna, continue to give shots across the nation, hoping to end this nightmare of a pandemic. In politics, the Senate Democrats are racing to pass President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. If passed, the bill will then go back to the House of Representatives for a separate vote before President Joe Biden signs it into a law. Opinion polls indicate a broad public support for the bill, especially with stimulus checks and the increased funding for COVID-19 vaccines to curb the spread of the disease. On this and much more, we bring to you tonight more insight into COVID-19 and South Asian doctors as well as Indian Consulate Generals of New York's efforts. Here are the headlines. Dr. Tushar Patel addresses COVID-19 vaccines and variants, New Jersey. GOPIO and Indian Consulate present virtual COVID-19 interactive session, Now and the Future update on vaccines, New York. Indian Consulate celebrates Black History Month 2021, Shared Values, Shared Aspirations, New York City. A lot more on the other side of the break. Stay with us on Vision of Asia, Voice of the Community. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. I am Aditi Lama and this is Vision of Asia, Thursday night episode of South Asian News. Let's take a look at the coronavirus pandemic's updates and measures. Some U.S. states, including Texas and Mississippi, are easing COVID-19 restrictions, including ending statewide public mask mandates. On that, Director of the CDC, Dr. Walensky, pleaded to the state officials to not relax health precautions now. President Joe Biden also has criticized officials in those states for lifting mask mandates and called their action Neanderthal thinking, and he insisted that it was a big mistake for people to stop wearing masks. On vaccines, the vaccination process is speeding up with the arrival of Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine, hoping to be the game changer. This is all happening while debate continues on if teachers and educators need to be vaccinated before going back to school. CDC suggested that schools can reopen safely without vaccinating the teachers and staff. So where do we go from here? We have now this segment of our conversation with Dr. Tushar Patel. Here is Dr. Patel. Dr. Anthony Fauci, nation's leading expert on coronavirus, said that Americans may be wearing masks up until 2022. What do you have to say about that?
That is probably too long of a time. In my opinion, I think by end of this year, we will see some difference as long as we have 70 to 80% of our population is vaccinated. At this time, we are only 102 million dose distributed. 78 million people received the vaccine, which is about 8%. And roughly 10% of people got the immunity from the virus itself by exposing with the COVID-19. So right now we are at 20% of immunity. We have to create that 60% immunity in order to be safe and call this pandemic off. So Dr. Fauci is a scientist. He knows what he's talking about. I appreciate his expertise, but in my opinion, I think by end of this year, we will see some difference.
Oh, wow. That's a very hopeful news. Let's hope that actually happens. You know, another issue that's up for debate when you're looking at the vaccination program, doctor, is the vaccination of educators, teachers, and the staff that's working in schools. The CDC has gone ahead and said that schools can safely open as long as they adhere to those key guidelines. However, it's not necessary for teachers to be vaccinated. How are you looking at it? Teachers are concerned nationwide about getting this virus.
I think, in my opinion, teachers should be vaccinated because they are at risk unless they're in the younger category. They should be vaccinated before they go to the school in the actual classrooms. And I think it's very important that they are protected from getting this disease.
Right, for sure. When you're looking at domestic travel, doctor, we are hearing that there's a talk about requiring vaccines for domestic travel, international travel. Do you think that should happen?
That should happen, and that should happen for the employer also. So if you're working in a grocery store, if you're working in a bank, if you're working in a hospital, you should provide that vaccination record in order for you to continue working there. I think that's long overdue. That has to happen.
Do you think we should be traveling?
Traveling is very tricky, so I always advise people avoid traveling if at all possible, because traveling right now is not safe. When you go in the airplane, there is no restriction there. People are sitting next to each other with a mask on, and longer flight definitely puts you at risk of getting this virus.
Right. I have just 3 more questions left for you, doctor. When you're looking at the vaccination program, and I know they're trying to ramp it up, what do you think they can do? What do you think they can add in this program, in this process that could truly speed up getting, more shots into Americans?
So Biden administration definitely is taking some efforts right now to increase the ramping up of the vaccine. And one good news is J&J vaccination rollout plan includes Merck is helping them. So we are expecting 3.9 million vaccines this week, 20 million doses by end of March, and 100 million doses by end of June. I think that is a very good news that by end of June, we'll have close to 125 million people vaccinated just from the J&J vaccine. So increasing the ramp up, logistical nightmare should end very soon with J&J vaccine, and probably we are on the right track of beating this pandemic.
And when looking at South Asians at high risk, have you recently seen cases of them and COVID-19? How at risk are they still?
So South Asians, other minority groups, African Americans, Hispanics, people with color, I think we are all at risk because of our predisposition to diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and some of them don't even know that they have it. So that is the whole reason we are at increased risk of getting COVID-19, and we all should be taking all the precautions even after the vaccine is taken to ensure that we don't spread the virus to our friends and relatives.
That's so true. And my final question to you actually has to be about your worry. What's your biggest worry right now when you're looking at this pandemic? What concerns you the most?
My biggest concern right now is people taking the liberty of roaming around without mask. They feel that they took the vaccine, they are safe. They are safe themselves, but they can spread the virus. Variants coming from the other countries, the Texas, Mississippi removing the mask mandates, reopening the business, those people coming back to New York, New Jersey, and other areas of the country definitely is worrisome for our pandemic response. And I think I see a huge problem if we don't control this as quickly as possible.
What's your advice to our viewers, doctor?
Masks are effective way to reduce the spread. Have the mask on. You must have the mask on after the vaccine. Stay 6 feet away. Avoid crowding, indoor gathering. Take the vaccine as soon as you have it available. Whichever vaccine you can get hold of, that is the way to get it. Register for COVID vaccine if you haven't done so. Avoid having indoor parties, wash your hands frequently, and take all the common sense precautions public health officials are telling us to do. Don't listen to your politicians, but listen to your public health officials, including CDC, state and local officials. I think that is the only way we will be able to mitigate the virus spread in this country, and we can beat the pandemic in the upcoming months.
More on the coronavirus pandemic. In the United States so far, there have been more than 82 million COVID-19 vaccines administered all across. Out of those, 27 million Americans have been fully vaccinated, which is about 8% of the population. In the vaccination process, many states are now working on channeling vaccine doses to low-income communities impacted the most by coronavirus pandemic. It is an effort to make the vaccine rollout more equitable and to reduce the numbers of communities most at risk. Many brown and black communities, including South Asian Americans, have been disproportionately impacted by the ramifications of COVID-19 pandemic and now also see the same inequity in vaccine distribution. Meanwhile, India, home to many of our viewers, has announced that their COVID-19 COVID vaccine by Bharat Biotech shows 81% efficacy. More on COVID-19 vaccines and their impact, we have now highlights from a recent virtual interactive session presented by the Indian Consulate of New York and GOPIO, Global Organization of People of Indian Origin. The interactive session discussed now and the future updates on vaccine. Here is the story.
I also would like to once again thank GOPIO for taking lead in giving us a helping hand in dealing with the pandemic. When the pandemic was raging at its high last year, you came in support of students, of community members, of young ones, of old people, distribution of food, distribution of medicine, facilitating people's travel. All that is truly and deeply appreciated. I thank, we have a very distinguished speaker today, Dr. Hannah Axelrod, and I really look forward to her wise words as to how we can deal with this pandemic, what are its projections. To me, it seems that we are pushing the pandemic away with the vaccinations that are going on here in this country, in India and other parts of the world. But at the same time, the news that we get on mutations, on the vaccine trying to change itself is a cause of concern, not just for us, but everybody in the world.
Welcome everybody. Good evening, and Honorable Consul General Ranjit Kumar Jaiswal, our distinguished speaker, Dr. Hannah Axelrod, GOPIO Manhattan President, Shivendra Sofet, and the Executive Committee members, ladies and gentlemen. I bring greetings to you from GOPIO International and as advisor to GOPIO Manhattan. It is almost reaching one year since we are all homebound, and our New York area was the worst hit in the first half of last year. The country as a whole is still coming out of its peak from last month in coronavirus infection and death. Since the vaccination has got started in December, this webinar by Dr. Axelrod is very timely. Thanks to Dr. Arnab Ghosh for taking this initiative of organizing the webinar series on the health issues for our chapter, and we had a highly successful one on January 15th. And thanks to Dr. Asha Samant for putting together today's evening program.
We had a little COVID webinar a month back, actually a little more than a month back. And at that time, we had barely 2 vaccines approved. And just to think, within a matter of 7 weeks since we had that webinar, we now have in the US 3 approved vaccines. In India, we have 2 approved vaccines, and they have gone on to phase 2 trials. And just to think of the science, which has last year at this time, we were just seeing this disease spread, learning a lot about this disease and getting thoroughly scared about how quickly the pandemic has spread. And this spring, this winter and this spring, we have been primarily getting the good news about it, about the development of vaccines. And it's really fascinating how well the science seems to have worked. So let me start off with a few questions that I got on the chat and a few more that I have been getting over the emails. So let me start off with a question that Ms. Belvarier just talked about, and she was asking, which vaccine is better? Do we know that yet? We have 10 vaccines now. You talked about at least 3 of them approved. Which is better?
The short answer is the one you can get. Now, we're not anywhere in the world, we're not anywhere near being able to pick and choose, at least not in terms of strategy. That said, as more vaccine doses become available, that does become a question. We may wish to use our highest efficacy vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, possibly for people who are older, who need the strongest levels of protection or the highest certainty. We may want to use them for healthcare workers. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine that was just authorized, we still have some data that will come in that will show if a second dose will make it even more effective.
Time for another short break on Vision of Asia, Voice of the Community. We'll be back shortly. And welcome back. I am Aditi Lama, and this is Vision of Asia South Asian News segment. The month of February is commemorated as Black History Month, an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing their essential and central role in the U.S. history. Since 1976, every U.S. president has officially designated the month as Black History Month, with countries around the world, including the UK and Canada, also devoting a month to Black history. This year, the Black History Month 2021 had a theme of Black family, representation, identity, and diversity, exploring the African diaspora and spread of Black families across the U.S. On that, recently, the Indian Consulate of New York held its own virtual Black History Month celebration titled Shared Values, Shared Aspirations. The event highlighted similarities between the struggle of freedom fighters MLK and Mahatma Gandhi and the alliance between Black and Indian communities. Here is a story which also saw Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams.
Each year in the month of February, we get a chance, an opportunity to remember the contribution, courage, sacrifice, and the indelible mark of the African American community in the onward march of this great nation. It is a time to rejoice in the achievements of the past, even as we resolve to not let those ideas which pull us down to engulf our society yet again. It is a time to rejoice and cherish our democratic values, values of equality, values of dignity, and ideas that help us overcome the artificial divides in our society.
Black History Month is a time to recognize and celebrate the important role of Black individuals in American history. But we also need to acknowledge there is still work to be done in the movement towards racial equality. The struggle for equality is not one that is exclusive to Blacks in the United States. In fact, our friends in India are well familiar. Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are two of history's greatest social justice advocates. They are held in the highest regard by our nations because of the values and principles on which they stood, especially that basic human rights should be a birthright of all and not just a privileged few. We take this time, this month, to reflect on the contributions that scores of African Americans have made to this country and to the world.
The person who has influenced my life in terms of action more than anybody is Mahatma Gandhi.
I came to Gandhi in the same setting in theological seminary days. I had heard of Gandhi, but I remembered hearing a message by the president of Howard University, Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who had just returned from India. Spoke in Philadelphia on his trip to India and the whole philosophy of Gandhi and passive and nonviolent resistance. I was so deeply moved by the message that I went away and bought several books on the Gandhian, on Gandhi and Gandhian technique. And at that point, I became deeply influenced by Gandhi.
Dr. King said to an audience right here in New York City, Christ showed us the way, Gandhi the Indian showed us how it would work. So you can see, or between both countries, there's always been this shared value, there's always been shared aspiration, which I think the philosophy of Gandhi has really laid out for us. I think it becomes imperative upon us and our students to really show them how this will work in our society. This particular year in the United States has been very difficult for us, for me, and for my students, with tragedies that can be summed up by the name of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. when I talk to my students, what I say to them, I say, you got to go back and reflect and see on how we can speak out and use the words of Gandhi in leading our different work. Again, this goes back again to reflect on our shared values and aspirations that we both have as a common group. It is a great strength and courage to see all of the variants around them and wanting to use the lessons we can learn from Gandhi and the lessons we can learn from King in moving forward. At Bronx Community College, we practice a very prudent form of nonviolence and passive resistance, something that the men of colors have shown to us and we believe in using our education.
In fact, all the major transformations for the better in American society in the last 100 years have come as a result of movements making the state make reforms. So the labor reforms of the 1930s came because of labor movements, which Franklin Roosevelt responded to. The civil rights legislation, it's a remarkable legislation in the 60s, came as a result of Martin Luther King's movements. And of course, Indian independence was won because of the popular mobilizations by Gandhi. So both of them shared a skepticism that the state would do any fundamental transformation for the good. I mean, it may make marginal changes on its own, but it wouldn't make major changes or fundamental changes unless movements made the state do it.
We're starting to get the sense that, we're coming into our own, we're becoming adults in this world, and that it is our turn, it is our time to start making change, to start fighting, to start doing what we think is right as the world becomes ours and becomes our own. And I certainly have faith that in my generation, there's a much larger movement of people who are socially conscious, socially aware, and who really care about the issues that exist in this country and that have seen and had the fortune of knowing history and understanding everything that comes before us and seeing all the great people who have come before us and all the work that they've done, and understanding that we want to make sure that that job gets finished, that we want to build on that work and not let it go to waste, and that enough is enough, and that hopefully we can finally make the change that this nation has needed for so long.
Well, this wraps up our show for the night. Please send us your suggestions and get your voices and organizations on our show. Email us on events@itvgold.com or follow us on Facebook at itvgold. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for free access to many of our popular shows. Thank you for joining us tonight from Queens, New York. This is Vision of Asia, and I am Diti Lamba. Take care and be well.